Hello Internet, and today's video is going to be a top 7 in 7 days. We're on day number 6, and the subject of day number 6 is books that really surprised you, unexpected reads, ones that you were like, oh, I don't know if I'll like that, but you ended up really loving them at the end of the day. So of course, disclaimers, these are in no particular order. I just picked them up, wrote them down. Just grab them in this order, okay? I already had to pick 7. It's hard enough to pick which one is number 1 of the 7. So, other than that, these are all books that I have read in 2017, so they're more recent and fresh in my memory. So let's get into these books. Book number 1 is going to go to Under a Painted Sky by Stacey Lee. This was really a surprise to me because I've said time and time again, I really don't like era pieces, period pieces, and I especially don't like those that take place in a Eurocentric period because a lot of times there's a lot of racism and sexism, and I just get really frustrated by the unjustness of it all. So this play takes place in like the early 1800s, around the time of the Oregon Trail and when gold digging was first becoming a thing in America, and we follow a Chinese girl and her father has just passed, and she ends up running away with a ex-slave girl, and they end up trying to make their way out to the west to gain freedom. And it had the added benefit of being a very diverse cast of characters, just like proving the point that people of color existed long before modern times. I'm so tired of seeing period pieces, whether in books or TV shows, and it's just a bunch of white people. I'm sorry, other people existed too. So we have a Chinese girl, we have a black girl, we have a Mexican man, and we just see all these different types of people, and we hear about all these different types of people, and I'm just like, yeah, you want to know why? Because more than 2 people exist, that's why. Book number 2 is going to go to The Love Interest by Kale DeReach, I don't know. You know, for as much as I like to point out the importance of saying people's names right, I always say people's names wrong. I'm rather ashamed of the fact. But this book is about a group called the Love Interest, and they are like this government-run secret entity that runs a basic brothel. Okay, it's basically a brothel. So they create like super gorgeous looking people, and then they have those people go into the lives of very talented, influential people, eventually become their spouses, their lovers, that sort of thing, so that they can get all the secrets from all these influential people. I think why I ended up loving this book so much was just something, I don't know if this was supposed to be the commentary of the book, but this is how I read the book because I like reading deeper meanings into books just for the hell of it. And it was the objectification of males in this book. We see a lot in entertainment with females, where females are constantly objectified, but not as much with males, where in television per se, males can be shown being sexy, but that's not all they are. It's always like, oh, they're sexy, but they have a lot of great qualities. But where females, it's just that they're sexy. So my favorite part about this book was that it objectified males, because you find out love interests can be females too in this world, but it specifically is talking about the male program, and then just how messed up that is, and how it messes up your head when you're told that the only important thing about you is that you look good, and how like it fucks you up in the head, like it just really does. So I guess that was the reason why this book really just, it spoke to me on so many levels, because I just love seeing when they take concepts that are so familiar to us that we almost ignore them, flip them on their head and show them in a way that we're not used to, so that we can fully understand how messed up the reality of a situation really is. Book number 3 is going to be Furthermore by Tiara Mafi. This is sort of a Alice in Wonderland retelling, but more entertaining. I mean, like, I really tried to get in Alice in Wonderland. I always heard about it. I really tried, but it wasn't my thing. And then this book was written. I ended up absolutely falling in love with it. So it's about a girl who I believe her name is Alice. Yes, Her name is Alice. So it's about a girl named Alice, and she lives in a world where color is magic. And color has so much to do with this world that she lives in, except she was born without pigment for whatever reason. It's not really explained. She was just born that way. And because of that, she doesn't really get along well in society because she's the odd one out. She ends up getting involved with this kid who finds out like there's this other world that is like theirs but different, and they end up traveling to this world to find this girl's father. And Alice and this kid are venturing in this world called Furthermore. Furthermore is like a version of Wonderland but a lot more menacing, which is why I ended up really loving this book, is because I loved the whole concept of Furthermore, where it was like just a bunch of nonsense makes a bunch of sense. So it'd be like you have to take everything literal to understand Furthermore. And my favorite part of it is when this kid was explaining to Alice like what's the right and wrong and how Furthermore doesn't work in metaphors but in actualities. It made so much sense even though it didn't make any sense at all. And I just loved having that this idea of logic was turned on its head, so you had to think differently in order to survive. Book number 4 is like the last book, where I heard about it a lot on BookTube, just mentioned occasionally, and usually with a stipulation of, oh, this book was okay, but I didn't really like it that much, or it wasn't as good as past books, or whatever like that. So when I went into it, I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this because so many people just say it's okay for them. So I'm gonna try it because I want to read more, but I'm not quite sure if I'll like it. And that ended up being Armada by Ernest Cline, who wrote Ready Player One. Now, I haven't read Ready Player One, so maybe I'm at an advantage there that I don't know what to compare it to in essence of like this guy's writing. But Armada ended up being a really great book for me, but I do understand why people wouldn't like it. So Armada is more of those books who are for those people who are really pop culture nerds. Sci-fi pop culture nerds. So Armada is about this kid, and he ends up finding out that the government has been training people to get used to the idea of aliens and then fight aliens through the use of video games and television and the sci-fi uprising. So the government has been slowly feeding the public the idea aliens exist and they will attack, and then have been teaching them through the use of online video games and console video games how to fight. And it's about this kid, and he ends up finding out all of this was for a purpose because they're being attacked by a whole bunch of aliens, a whole bunch, and humanity must fight back to survive. So number 5 is going to go to Renegades by Marissa Meyer, and I ended up really liking this book. I bought it because I had seen it a lot on Bookstagram, and I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna buy it. I ended up really liking it. So this is sort of an X-Men type story. So if you're familiar with the X-Men, it kind of goes like this. There are 2 groups. One's called the Anarchists and one's called the Renegades. Anarchists are more like the Magneto side, and the Renegades are more like the Xavier side. So in this, Magneto wins. His plan where he wants to destroy the government and have mutants rise and everything, that succeeds with the Anarchists under a man called Ace Anarchy. Now Ace gets defeated later by the Renegades, the aka Xavier side. The Renegades end up putting forth their own sort of government and superhero identity, sort of superhero kingdom, right? And we follow 2 characters, one who is from the anarchist side and then one from the renegade side. And this is not your traditional superhero story like we've seen more mainstream in media, where it's just a bunch of bad guys defeating good guys defeating bad guys. This is not like that. This is more of the classic comic book sort of idea with superheroes, where it's more about philosophy. It's more about the relationships in between people and who's right and who's wrong, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. Because a lot of the anarchists, who are the supposed bad guys according to the renegade propaganda, they have a lot of amazing points, and then a lot of the renegades do a lot of screwed up, messed up, really bad things. So this is not your traditional superhero book as the mainstream would portray it, where it's just a bunch of battle sequences. This is a philosophical debate over who is good, who is bad, why they're good, why they're bad, and all the gray in-betweens that comes with having superpowers and having people who have superpowers be in control. Book number 6 is going to go to Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This was really a surprise to me, like really a surprise. I picked this up because I think I had seen Thoughts on Tomes talk about it, and I was like, I trust her. So I ended up picking it up, and like as far as I knew, it was just this girl who became the apprentice of a magician for some reason. And I was like, oh, it's just gonna be some stupid love story between the magician and his apprentice. And oh my gosh, was it amazing. So the re-edited version of what this book is really about, it's like set in this high fantasy sort of world where there is this thing that they refer to as the woods, and the woods has been creeping and growing, and out of the woods comes these like wood-like monster Groot-like people, and they constantly snatch up people and drag them into the woods. And once you go into the woods, you don't come back out, and if you do come back out as a shell. You're no longer a real person. Like the woods is inside of you, and you have to kill that person because they're just like obsessed. They've been zombified, right? So the woods are slowly encroaching onto these villages, and these villages have a protector called the dragon. He's a magician. His job is to fight back against the woods so that the people can still live there, because that's where they want to live, you know. Humans always want to live in dangerous places. So the dragon, as payment for protecting all of these people from the woods, 10 years takes a girl from one of the villages. He chooses the best girl and he takes her to the tower, and she is supposed to serve him, not sexually, just like do his dishes and stuff and feed him food. And then for the next 10 years, that's what happens. And usually these girls don't come back to the villages, they move to the city. So a lot of people are like scared to send their daughters because of course they think this guy's using the girls sexually, but they don't know what to do. And then when their daughters come back, their daughters aren't the same, so they're like, oh, okay, we'll give you our kids if you protect us. And we follow this girl, and it turns out she has powers. And then there's this whole big thing about the woods, and I was so excited about this book. Like, I was reading this book when I was over and I was staying with family, and I just kept looking up and I kept telling my older brother, this is what's happening in my book right now. Like, listen to me right now. This is what's happening in my book. And then I kept bothering my sister. I was like, listen what's happening in my book right now. I'm gonna tell you the whole damn book so you can't read it, because I'm gonna explain the whole thing. And like, I have a horrible bad habit. Like, if you are my friend, it's inevitable that I'm gonna end up explaining the whole plot of a book to you. And this was one of those books for me where I just couldn't contain my excitement over everything that was happening. I was just so overjoyed about everything, and I had a really, really fun time just like discovering the world, figuring out what was going on. So it was really, really unexpected that I loved this book as much as I ended up loving it. And the last book, book number 7 for books that I found unexpected but ended up loving at the end of the day, is going to go to The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo. So I love fairy tales. So the fact that this was a set of fairy tales doesn't really surprise me. If you're unfamiliar with this book, this is a Grishaverse sort of book. It is just a premise of these are fairy tales that people in the Grishaverse would have heard as children. So the fact that these were fairy tales wasn't the part I was scared about. It was the fact that it was Leigh Bardugo that I was scared about. I love Bardugo, don't get me wrong, I really, really do. But I hate her endings, okay? Every single one of her endings when it comes to the end of a series just seems so forced that I can't do anything about it. Because I think with her writing, the biggest problem I have with it is that it is a constant, here are a bunch of terrible things that are going to happen. This isn't a happy place. Here's a bunch of horrible stuff and horrible people who do horrible stuff. And I'm all good with that, right? But when it comes to her endings, it feels more like a force. Like, because you want to set up this premise of like a horrible dark world, some horrible grim shit has to happen at the end. But it really doesn't make sense that it's happening, because honestly, for every single one of her endings, I could pull out that little grim thing that she sprinkled on the top and been like, the ending wouldn't have been affected any differently if you just hadn't done that. Like, there's no purpose to putting a grim, bittersweet ending on the tagline. Like, there really isn't. I respect endings when they make me feel like shit if there is a reason, if there's a purpose, if I could understand that the only built that this boat could have had at the end of the day was that it was going to be tragic, it was going to be horrible, and I was going to leave crying my eyes out. But at the end of most of Leigh Bardugo stories, I'm just like, bitch, you could have wrote that differently. That wasn't necessary. So when this one was surprising to me, because I was not expecting the grim ends to all of this, and I wasn't expecting to love them, because most of the time I think she forces the endings to be grim for the sake of an interesting dark ending. But in these fairy tales are dark and twisted, but never is the end forced. Like, it feels so natural for the ending that is given to every one of these fairy tales to be there. Like, it's not forced, it's not unexpected, it's not like, oh, you could have changed it and the story would have been still the same, so there was really no point of why you added that. Like, these stories would not have been the same without that grimness, without that darkness at the end that just really captured you. So that's why I ended up really, really loving this, is because it just finally felt like those grim endings, those dark endings that she kept trying to give her stories, finally had a purpose other than, oh, I'm just going to put this here because, you know, I heard people like that sort of stuff. Like this, it was like, oh, if I didn't have that in there, the whole story would be different. Where in previous books, like I have constantly said in the last few minutes, constantly do. So, this I ended up really enjoying because I felt like it was an improvement on an issue that I've had with her writing in the past. So, those were all the books that I unexpectedly enjoyed more than I had originally intended that I would enjoy when I first started reading them. And if you have any books that are just like, ooh, I thought this book was gonna be crap, but I ended up loving it for whatever reason, like even if it was a trash novel, but you just ended up really liking it, tell me what's that trash novel that you ended up really liking. And if you like what you're seeing here and you want to continue to see more, click all those bunnies down below. And don't forget to go check out Book Roast, who started this whole thing, and her video on the topic. Goodbye, Internet.